So for those of you who are out there building Power Apps, you may not always understand where you need to place everything or the best design for your application. So today we've brought in a designer, a UX expert, to help us give one of our applications a facelift. With the advent of the Power Platform and Microsoft 365, many more of us now have the ability to develop applications for our organizations. It's no longer a limited set of UX designers and developers who have their hands on those tools. And so one of the things that recently happened is our resident UX expert wrote a blog post on user-friendly design, and I took a look at that blog post and I thought, I really should apply this to some of the Canvas apps or some of the Power Apps that I've been building. So today we're going to walk through that with Josh and give that application a facelift based on some of those best practices that he's identified. So we're going to pull up the application for you right here. And this application in particular is a simple Canvas app. It's backed by a bunch of SharePoint data as well as data from Office 365, like your Outlook calendar and things like that. And it's intended to be mobile friendly, and it's intended to allow the user to basically book a workspace, a hoteling workspace. So in the case that they're in town and they need to find a place to work for a couple hours or maybe for the day, they're able to pull this application up, find a place that's in relative close proximity to them and book that workspace. All right, so one of the first things we noticed in this application that I kind of took some information from your blog post and thought it was very useful is don't distract users. And you were kind enough to point out the footer in this case, like why do we have it, right?
Exactly. You see, the footer here just has nothing more than the company name and the version of the application, but that doesn't really provide a lot of value to the users. So why take up the precious vertical space that we have on our screen?
Right, that's a great point. And there, as we'll see in a few minutes, there are some of our screens that are just cram-packed full of stuff, and actually removing this footer will be really helpful in those scenarios. And then the other thing, just to make a note on the Power Apps front, for those of you who are out there building low-code, no-code solutions, Josh, one of your points was, well, if you have a version number, like, do you really need the version number on there? Because how many versions of this are really out there in the wild?
Exactly.
Right? And in the case that we're building a Canvas app, truly, there's usually not very many versions of it out in the wild. People will deploy this to one environment. It's not like users install this on their mobile device, right? Their own copy of it. Yeah. So usually there's really only ever one version, so that's completely unnecessary. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually go through a few of our screens here and just simply remove our footer. So I'll kind of walk through the application, some of these pages. And so right away, this is one of those screens that would benefit from more space. We've got a lot crammed on here, right?
Oh yeah, and it might not seem like a lot, but that 20, 30, 40 pixels ends up fitting an entire subheader. It could fit a button. There's a lot of there's a lot of breathing room that clears up.
Right. Let me get one more screen here. I know there will be some we can remove in the future, but it's as simple as that. And then the other thing that you had mentioned was simplifying some of the stuff that is in the header. So in this particular case, we have a back arrow that we're using. And you pointed out, use something simpler than that.
Oh yeah, I mentioned breathing room previously, and that icon right there just takes up a lot of space when something as simple as a chevron could very easily accomplish the same goals while taking up less space.
That's an excellent point, and that's super easy to do. We can simply come in here and go find our left chevron, and there it is. And then you also mentioned just making it smaller, right?
Yeah, that's pretty big for an icon. As far as touchable area, the maximum the minimum we really need for touchable area is about 40 to 48 pixels, depending on Apple or Google's guidelines. So we don't really need anything bigger than that for our thumbs to be able to touch it and to be able to actually interact with the button.
Very good. And in this particular case, I think we also have, some misalignment in our header. Let me go back a couple and take a look at this header. I think you had also mentioned centering our title, right? So let's go take a quick look at that header and open that up and see kind of what we have there. So we have our label for our application. So let's just go ahead and center this, and this will be a pretty easy fix. This will take place across the entire application. So we'll do that, and then we'll simply come and center it. And then typical placement for a logo, right? That should be right-hand side, upper right corner.
Right-hand side, left-hand side if you don't have an interactive back button. But as long as we have text up there, we want the logo to kind of be out of the way, and we want the text and the contextual information to be what's front and center and most important for a user.
Okay, very good. So we've made that change. So now let's jump back to our screens and see what that looks like. So that changed there. And if we go to our screen, we've got our back arrow or our chevron now, and that looks a whole lot better.
Already we've freed up a lot of space so that things aren't quite as cramped, and that we've just got some breathing room.
Very, very good. And we'll go through and we'll make that chevron change as we work our way through some of the other screens as well. All right, so one of the other big topics that you pointed out in your article or your post, Josh, was don't break user expectations. And there are a number of things that you pointed out in this application that were just different than what the norm would be or what users have grown accustomed to when they're manipulating a mobile device.
Exactly. In this screen specifically, one of the first things that I did when I was using my phone was I tried touching right there, because that whole section looks like it should be clickable. And
Yep.
in all honesty, it probably should be clickable.
Yep, and that's actually something, that's a great point. In this particular case, we're using the vertical gallery that Power Apps gives you out of the box. And by default, usually you get a couple lines of text, maybe an image, and then you get a button on the right, and that's how this was put together. But that can very easily be changed so that we can make that whole area clickable. So if I simply select this, you'll see that I've got a label here, I've got our little icon here. But what we want to do is we want to make this entire thing clickable. We want this entire area to be able to basically execute this command that's defined in this onSelect. So I'm going to copy that out real quick, and then I'm going to simply select our gallery item. I'm going to jump over here and we're going to add a button to it. So now I've got a button there, and oh, it's an ugly gray button, but we're going to fix that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of our button text. And then we're going to jump out here and we're going to change our fill. And instead of using the standard fill, we're just going to blank this out. Now it's empty, and then just to be extra careful, I don't need any implication that there's a button here, so I'm going to remove the border altogether. And now the last thing I want to do is I want to make sure I've got that button selected, our new button, which I do. And I can come in here in the onSelect, just like on the other button, and I can basically paste that same logic that we had in there. And so now, instead of just clicking on this individual thing, I can actually come over here. You'll notice the whole area is hot. My little cursor is changing, but I can click anywhere in here and select headquarters, right? So
That's going to make things a lot easier for mobile users and anybody that's using a touch device. It might make sense to click specifically the icon if you're using a cursor and you are designing with a cursor at the moment. But when we think about how users are actually going to interact with their devices, it just makes sense for that whole area to be clickable so that there's more room for people to click in the wrong space.
Yep.
And it's just an intuitive function of mobile devices.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. We can use that change or that modification throughout this application. There are a number of places where that makes sense. One of the other things that you had pointed out is you had noticed when using the application on your mobile device that when you just used the back button on your Android device, it didn't do what you wanted it to do, right?
Exactly. Since I do use an Android device and not a Apple device, I've become pretty accustomed to using the back button in the bottom right-hand corner of my phone. So I'm not really used to having to click the top left of an application like this. So when I clicked that back button, the native function of Power Apps was to go back to my gallery of Power Apps, and it reset all the progress that I had just made.
Yeah.
So I had to actively think about which button do I press to do something that my brain just knows how to do. I just hit the back button.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't work, that causes frustration.
Well, yeah, and let's say you're like 3 screens into this application, you've selected your workspace, you're about ready to book it, you want to go check one thing, and you push that back button on your device, and all of a sudden you undo all of that work. It's just a terrible user experience.
At that point, I had just accidentally opened the filters panel, and with that filters panel, I realized I didn't need to filter anything, hit the back button, and I had just undone 4 or 5 screens deep worth of work. And that's frustrating.
So excellent point. Fortunately, in the case of building a Canvas app or Power Apps, we have a way to deal with that particular scenario. It is specifically in the settings of your Canvas app. If you dive into the upcoming features tab and simply look in here, do a search for back, and you'll find an option to turn on the ability to use the Android back button. So it works for Android. I can't speak to iPhone right now. But at least somebody was smart enough at Microsoft to build that in to allow the users to use that functionality. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on, and now we solved that problem for our users. So one of the other things you had brought up when it comes to breaking user expectations, Josh, was using primary colors to indicate to the user what the primary objective is. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So as we go to this screen here, there's a lot going on this screen. And a lot of that is distracting to users because they're looking for something which stands out to tell them what their goal is here. So typically, your primary color is going to be the one thing you want them to do. But I look at this app and I see the first bright thing I see is view map. Is viewing map the first thing that I should see and what I want to do here? Then I see select in yellow. Select is an important thing, but I'm also having trouble reading that because of contrast issues, which we'll get into in a little bit. But really, the goal of this app is this book a room. So why are we competing for attention with all of these other yellow objects? Ideally, we have one primary call to action, and anything that's secondary should stand out from the background, but it shouldn't be distracting us from what our goal is, which in this case is book a room.
Sure. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we can make a simple change to this to solve that problem. I think we'll deal with some of the select and the check icon here in the future when we talk about accessibility. But in this case, we can at least eliminate confusion with this view map, which is a pretty primary yellow thing, simply by changing the color. So let's go ahead and change that. I think if I change this to our primary 3 color, right, then it will basically match the colors of all of those other secondary functions, right, for the user. Okay, so let's get a little bit more, I guess let's get deeper on this particular screen. So there's a lot of stuff happening. You mentioned that. What are some things that we can do to kind of improve our overall layout and like letting the user know what they need to do? There's a lot of stuff on here you had mentioned, like you can use icons where icons are clear. We don't need the text, right?
Exactly.
So what are some of those things?
We've got a lot of stuff here that's taken up a lot of space. And sometimes you need that clarification, but sometimes you really just don't. So for example, with the map and the filters button, people are pretty accustomed to know what a map icon looks like. They see that pointer, they know it's a map. So do we really need the text that says view map, especially when it's kind of a secondary function? It's not even really an objective.
Okay, so you're basically saying, hey, go in here, get rid of that text off of your button. You
just
don't
get
need
rid
it,
of the text.
Right? And then we can even take our button or our entire control here, now that text is gone, and we can shrink this guy down, right?
Exactly. And we've just freed up a lot of space that can now be served for something more valuable.
Let's do that group a little bit better. So now, where might we move that to make it better? Is this something that, so what's going on here is the user has the ability to select a particular date and time for their booking, for their workspace. And then these other options are, I'm going to show it to you on a map so that your geography is straight in your head. You know where to go find that workspace. And then in the case of our filters, if you want certain amenities or something, that's what that's for. Which of those things should be top or bottom? Does that matter?
Now, I personally think that typically you'll want to put the most important thing first, but in this case, since we're deprioritizing the map and the filters button, we can put those on top and maybe off to the right, just so we can kind of tuck them away. They're still there, but they're not as important. But when we put something closer to another thing that it's associated with, our brains kind of associate them as being related. So if we put these filters here next to these results here, it's going to be a little bit clearer that these filters are going to alter these results.
Okay. So I'm going to clean these up a little bit. And what about like our icon size in these particular scenarios? If I have just a button, no text, and I have an icon there, should I fill the space? What's the safe thing to do?
You definitely want to leave your icons at least large enough to read and understand what they are. I'd say I wouldn't go personally any smaller than 32 pixels for an icon, but you also want to give it a little bit of breathing room within the button so it's clear that it's a button and that there's a tappable area around it, and so that things just look nicer when they have a little bit of room to breathe. So definitely don't bring your button any smaller than the 40 to 48 pixels that is a minimal tappable area, but we don't need those to be quite as large as long as it's not the most important thing that you're trying to do.
Okay, very good. So let's kind of centered those in those little buttons. We're going to move those to the top now. So let's see if we can kind of get these out of our way so we can move our other stuff down. So we're going to temporarily stick these things up here in our kind of our header line. And then we're going to bring these things down. And I'm noticing as I'm moving this around that like it's not exactly perfectly aligned. Like this icon isn't aligned necessarily with our text.
Now, those are little quality of life issues that isn't going to really affect the functionality of the application per se, but it's going to affect the user's perceived quality of the application. And people will notice that. It might not seem like a big deal, but those little details are the things that people kind of pick. It subconsciously affects their opinions.
Okay. Let's get these things lined up.
See, now, another thing that we've already done by doing this is we've created a more clear relationship between things that are in fact related. So we have select workspace, that's our primary header, our H1, and then we have in headquarters floor 9. Simply by giving this breathing room, it's easier to tell that we are selecting a workspace here, rather than this all just being information that's being thrown at us.
Yep. Makes it easier to make sense of, right?
Exactly. We've also associated these controls together, so we know that even if we don't have the words here, we know that these are controls because these are controls, and these controls are related to these results.
Very nice. It's starting to look a lot better already, right?
Already. So another thing that's kind of breaking up that relationship I was talking about is this pagination here. And pagination is just kind of an awkward behavior for mobile devices to begin with, because we're used to scrolling on mobile devices. All of your social media applications and your email, you'll just scroll until you hit the bottom. So why are we breaking that up? Why are we telling users to do something that they don't naturally want to do? So we could eliminate that pagination and free up even more space on the screen, as well as make this area functional, scrollable functionality right here.
All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to make it visible false. There was a reason for the pagination in this particular case. We had a lot of workspaces coming back and it was creating a performance challenge. But in this particular environment, we don't have that. And we can certainly eliminate that. So we'll go ahead and hide those. But you're right, now we can basically take this gallery and get more room out of this, right?
Yeah.
And we can even probably move these things up a little bit more. That makes sense?
I wouldn't even move those up at all, actually.
Just keep them down?
Keep it there, because for the most part, users, when they're using a phone, there's only so much screen that they can actually touch.
Get with their thumb, right.
If I'm looking at my phone right here, I can only touch about this much of my screen. So we don't need to put those buttons all the way up here. If we put them towards the middle or the bottom of the screen, I can reach them just fine without having to use a second hand to do so.
Okay, well that makes perfect sense. And we do have some more room we can gain down here at the bottom as well, because we can drop this book button down and expand our gallery even a little bit further.
So while we're on this screen, some strictly visual things that don't necessarily impact the usability but might make this look a little bit better would be to bring that call to action button full width. So it takes up more space, it gives you more tappable area, and it looks like it's covering the content, if that makes sense. And then additionally, since there's already some spacing built in to the list here, we can just extend those all the way to the edge, so we don't have that dead space on either side.
Gotcha.
Now, additionally, that scroll bar is a little bit distracting if it's persistent, but if we can make it invisible, then that's one way for us to make things look a little bit nicer. But from a functionality standpoint, the scroll bar does have some value. So ultimately, so long as it's obvious that this is a scrollable area,
you can scroll.
As long as it's obvious that scrolling is a thing, the scroll bar is kind of up to you.
Yep.
Additionally, we don't really need some of the extra UI chrome, such as the border around this list.
Sure.
It's good to have the border between the items, but that border around the list is just kind of taking up space.
All right, so I've made some of those changes that you talked about. I was just noticing though, like when you had mentioned, like as long as it's evident that it's scrollable, I was looking at our list here and noticing that the bottom item in the list, you can just catch the select call to action peeking up above our little button there. But on this side, you can't see the text. and I realized that these things are not aligned.
Oh, that's a good catch. I
at
didn't
all.
even see that.
So let's go ahead and make that change too.
If we center those, that would be a great way to...
So we can vertically align these, I'm pretty sure. That property, there it is. Goes middle, and then
And
let's do the
now
same
additionally, if we could align the end of select with the edge of that button and the beginning of the H with that button there, that'll really create a cohesiveness.
Yes.
Now, this is just the designer and me getting really nitpicky.
I like it. I like
But this is ultimately going to impact the quality of the app and how users will perceive it.
Oh, I think that's very good. Do that. And then I do know that there's a little select or check icon. So let's get that guy aligned too, right? There we go. Yeah, that's much better already. That's incredible change. And our scroll works. We don't have a scroll bar. It's good. Very good. Okay, I think that does it for part one of making this Power App more user-friendly. I really appreciate, Josh, you participating in this and helping. I think the pointers that you gave us just is a tremendous education for those of us who are building apps using Power Apps and this new no-code, low-code option. So it's been really great. We are going to do a second part of this video to clean up some more things in this Power App or in this Canvas app. So if you're interested in that, be sure to stay tuned. If you liked this video and found it helpful and would like to see more of it, be sure to subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them below and we'll try to get to those as we can. And also remember that we do a monthly office hours where you can kind of bring your own questions and challenges or things that you're stuck on and ask them, and we'll try to help you solve them. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.